Verstappen's radio did not expose one Red Bull problem. It exposed all of them. No power, broken deployment, overheating tires, poor balance, weak starts, 3 retirements already this season, and now Barcelona, where Hamilton won for Ferrari, Russell finished second for Mercedes, Norris put McLaren on the podium, and Verstappen was left fourth. That is not just frustration. That is evidence. Because the full Barcelona radio has not been released word for word, but the pattern is impossible to miss. Every message from Verstappen this season points to the same truth. Red Bull have not given their champion a car he can trust. And if the car cannot launch cleanly, deploy power properly, protect its tires, or let Verstappen attack, then Red Bull are not one small fix away. They are in a deeper crisis than they want to admit. Now, the biggest question is not what Verstappen said on the radio. It is how long Red Bull can keep hearing the same warning before their champion starts asking a much bigger question. Subscribe to the channel. Barcelona was supposed to be the race where Red Bull could finally change the conversation. Instead, it made Verstappen's frustration sound even more serious. Because before the Spanish Grand Prix, Red Bull still had a defense. The season had been messy. Yes, the retirements had hurt. The starts had been weak. The power delivery problems were real. The tires were overheating. The balance was not giving Verstappen the confidence he needed. But the team could still say one thing: we are working on it. That sentence can protect a team for a while. It gives engineers time. It gives the driver hope. It gives the media something to hold on to. It gives fans a reason to believe the next race might finally look different. But in Formula One, that sentence has an expiry date. At some point, working on it has to become fixing it. Barcelona was supposed to be that point. It was supposed to show that Red Bull had understood the warning signs. It was supposed to prove that the problems from Australia, China, and Monaco were not becoming the identity of the car. It was supposed to give Verstappen a machine. He could push, not manage. But the race told a different story. Verstappen finished fourth. And fourth place in isolation does not sound like disaster. It is points. It is a finish. It is better than another retirement. It gives the team something to record in the standings. But this is Max Verstappen. This is Red Bull. And context changes everything. Hamilton won for Ferrari. Russell finished second for Mercedes. Norris finished third for McLaren. 3 rival teams were ahead. Not 1, 3. That is why the result felt so heavy. It showed that Red Bull were not simply chasing one team that had found a perfect setup. They were behind the entire leading group. Ferrari had found enough to win. Mercedes had enough to finish strongly. McLaren had enough to reach the podium. Red Bull had enough to survive. That is not the standard Verstappen races for. And that is why the radio matters. Because radio is where frustration appears before it is cleaned up for interviews. A driver does not have time to choose perfect language when he is fighting a car at speed. He speaks from instinct. He reports what he feels. And when the same kind of messages keep coming across a season, they become more than emotion. They become diagnosis. Verstappen's complaints have not been random. They have pointed toward the same areas again and again. Power not arriving properly. Deployment problems. Weak starts. Poor balance. Tires overheating. A car that does not feel stable enough to attack. Those are not small issues. They are the foundations of a race car. If a car does not launch cleanly, Verstappen starts the race on the back foot. If the power deployment is not predictable, he cannot attack with certainty. If the tires overheat, the pace fades. If the balance is wrong, every corner becomes a negotiation. And if reliability is still a fear, then every weekend begins with doubt. That is why Red Bull's problem feels so deep. A Formula One car is not a list of separate parts. It is a chain. If one link weakens, the next link suffers. Then the next. Then the next. A poor start puts Verstappen in traffic. Traffic raises tire temperatures. Hot tires reduce grip. Less grip makes the balance worse. A worse balance means Verstappen cannot push. If he cannot push, the strategy becomes defensive. And once the strategy becomes defensive, the leaders escape. That is how a race can be lost without one dramatic mistake. That is what Barcelona showed. Verstappen was not driving a car that allowed him to bend the race around himself. He was driving a car that forced him to live inside its limitations. He could score. He could fight to a point. He could still extract something because he is Verstappen, but he could not turn the car into a winning threat. That is the key difference. During Red Bull's dominant years, Verstappen had a car that amplified his instincts. If he felt a gap, the car responded. If he needed to stretch a stint, the tires stayed alive. If he had to attack, the power and balance gave him the confidence to do it. Now, the car seems to ask him for caution. And caution is not how Verstappen destroys rivals. He is at his most dangerous when he trusts the car completely, when he can brake late without hesitation, when he can rotate the car exactly where he wants, when he can get back on the power and know the rear will hold, when the energy deployment arrives at the right moment, not a breath too late. That trust is missing. Barcelona made that clear. The source material does not provide a full official word-for-word Barcelona radio transcript, and that is important. We should not pretend there is one dramatic line from Spain that explains the whole crisis, but that actually makes the story more powerful. Because Red Bull do not need one new radio message to understand the warning. The warning has been building all season. In Australia, Verstappen complained that he had no power after a poor start. In China, his frustration with boost and deployment problems became impossible to ignore. After other difficult races, the pattern continued. The car did not feel good. The balance was missing. Tire degradation was high. There were problems with systems that should never distract a driver at the front. That is the voice of a champion losing confidence in the machine, not in himself, in the machine. And that is where Red Bull's crisis becomes dangerous. A driver can accept a difficult car if it is improving. He can accept one bad weekend if the direction is obvious. He can accept pain if the team gives him proof that the next step is real. But when the same problems keep returning, the driver starts asking a different question. Are we fixing the cause or only chasing the symptoms? That is a question Barcelona forced onto Red Bull. Because finishing fourth did not prove the car was fixed. It proved the car could finish. That is not the same thing. A Red Bull that finishes behind Ferrari, Mercedes, and McLaren is not a recovered Red Bull. It is a Red Bull still searching. And Verstappen knows it. You can hear it in the way his season has been described. Not one clean complaint, but a whole list. Difficult race. Things going wrong. No balance. High tire wear. Something wrong with the steering wheel. Power and deployment frustrations across the year. That is not a driver upset about one corner. That is a driver describing a car that refuses to give him a complete race. And in Barcelona, the result matched the feeling. Red Bull were not leading the story. They were reacting to it. Hamilton and Ferrari controlled the emotional headline. Russell and Mercedes held second. Norris and McLaren proved they had podium pace. Verstappen was left with fourth. And Red Bull were left with a question they cannot delay anymore. What exactly is the car failing to give him? The answer is not simple. And that is the problem. If this were only about straight line speed, Red Bull would chase efficiency and power. If this were only about tires, they would chase temperature control. If this were only about balance, they would chase setup and aerodynamic stability. If this were only about reliability, they would focus on the failing systems. But the source points to all of them being connected. The new hybrid rules have made energy management more important than ever. The electrical side of the power unit now carries a much larger role. Battery cooling matters. Energy recovery matters. Deployment matters. How the chassis works with the power unit matters. Red Bull have not yet made that whole package feel natural. And Verstappen is the one who feels that first. The data may show the engineers where the problem is. The radio shows the team how the problem feels. That distinction matters. Numbers can tell you the tires are overheating. The driver tells you the car is sliding and will not let him attack. Numbers can show deployment dropping. The driver tells you the power is not there when he needs it. Numbers can show balance instability. The driver tells you he cannot push. That is why Verstappen's radio is so damaging for Red Bull. It translates technical weakness into human frustration. It takes something hidden in sensors and turns it into a sentence everyone understands. The car is not right. And after Barcelona, Nobody can seriously argue that the car is close enough, because the scoreboard is brutal. Verstappen had only 43 points after 7 races. Red Bull were 4th in the Constructors' Championship with 69 points. Mercedes were far ahead. Ferrari were building momentum. McLaren were scoring strongly. This is not a team losing by tiny margins. This is a team that has fallen behind the front group and is trying to find a way back before the season becomes unrecoverable. That is why the reported emergency meeting before Barcelona mattered so much. When reports emerged of Verstappen speaking with senior Red Bull ownership figures in Milton Keynes, the paddock listened. Verstappen refused to confirm details and pushed back at the questions, saying conversations happen within the team all the time. That was a controlled answer. But controlled answers do not erase uncontrolled results. If Red Bull were winning, nobody would treat internal conversations as a crisis. If the car looked strong, nobody would connect meetings to Verstappen's future. If the radio messages sounded calm and confident, nobody would be asking whether his patience is being tested. The results make the story believable, and Barcelona made it louder. Because 4th place behind 3 rival teams does not calm speculation. It feeds it. Every time Verstappen is forced to explain another difficult race, every time Red Bull promises a fix that does not fully transform the car, every time the radio suggests the same problems are still alive, the future question becomes harder to contain. Will Verstappen wait? That is a question Red Bull fear more than any lap time. Because Verstappen is not just a driver. He is the center of the team's identity. He is the proof that Red Bull can still be dangerous even in a bad season. He is the one person rivals never want to see with a competitive car. But even Verstappen needs a car that gives him something back. Barcelona showed Red Bull are not giving him enough. And that is why the radio, the result, and the standings all point in the same direction. This is not a small dip. This is a crisis of confidence. Confidence in the starts. Confidence in the deployment. Confidence in the tires. Confidence in the balance. Confidence in the reliability. Confidence that Red Bull can still build Verstappen a winning car under the new rules. The next races are now about more than upgrades. They're about proof. Verstappen needs to feel the difference. Not hear about it. Not be told it is coming. Feel it. He needs a launch that does not leave him exposed. He needs power that arrives cleanly. He needs tires that do not overheat the moment he attacks. He needs balance that lets him lean on the car. He needs reliability that does not turn every weekend into a risk calculation. And most of all, he needs Red Bull to stop giving him reasons to talk about problems on the radio. Because every time he does, the world hears something Red Bull would rather keep inside. The champion is not comfortable. The car is not complete. And Barcelona proved the warning was real. But the real danger for Red Bull is that Verstappen's radio messages are not just emotional reactions.